I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Ronak Dashi is a partner at the technology practice covering digital transformation and applications. He covers horizontal technology areas such as AIs, APIs, blockchain, data and analytics, and enterprise applications. Ronak also leads global banking, financial services, and insurance industry research. Pratik Singh is a practice director aligned with the business process services practice. Pratik's responsibilities include leading Everest's Group's procurement and supply chain management, BPS memberships, offering and providing client customer strategic advisory support. Rita N. Soni is Everest's Group's principal analyst for impact sourcing and sustainability. Her focus delivers a triple bottom line lens of people, planet, and profits to global services markets research, beginning with an in-depth examination of impact sourcing. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Rita.
Thanks so much, Brandon. I'd like to kick this webinar off by mentioning a funny question that Ronak started all of us off. Good smile, I like it. He asks, what does an aspiring mountaineer, an engineer turned do-gooder, and a foodie who loves to cook have in common? Anyone? It's the three of us, and those are things that did not get mentioned in our bios from Brandon, but hopefully you can figure out which one of us fits each of those descriptions. So as part of level setting and talking about why we want to do this webinar, we wanted to get a baseline on understanding enterprises' priorities on sustainability and the maturity along that line. And with that, we want to get what is the relevance to enterprises? Where are they on this maturity curve? Are they really thinking only about regulations or how it affects employee retention, or is there more to it? And get into a little bit more about what is it that this particular model or tool of OKRs can help to achieve that. So before we get into the content of these particular topics, let's get into a poll to actually figure out what is your perception of your organization's commitment to sustainability initiatives. I like asking this question, and Ronak, you've been part of a lot of these conversations as well. I think it's a great place to start with these conversations in like getting to, are you increasing? Is it significantly increased investments, somewhat, not change, decreasing, and significantly decreasing?
Yeah.
As people are answering, what are your thoughts on, we've asked this question over the last several years of focusing on sustainability?
Yeah, I think, Rita, what's interesting for me in all our conversations is sustainability is at the center of what organizations are building their forward-looking strategies, right? I was with a client who's building a 2030 roadmap for the entire organization. And they said the core principle we're going to design the entire organization strategy from a long-term perspective is going to be put sustainability at the core and then design everything around it. And then they said this is going to become the way of life of how we do business. And it's a massive change management exercise that they're thinking about as they look at it. So definitely at a long-term view, it is something that all our clients are thinking about in one way or the other. I know the question we're going to discuss today is, are there certain distractions who's kind of, moving away from this goalpost and targets and kind of changing our path to sustainability? I think that's the key discussion I definitely want to have. And I think, we should also share the results out as we start seeing this. So, and I'm already seeing the results out here, and it seems like everybody's saying almost like 88% are saying there's going to be some increase or significant increase. So I think that's kind of aligns with, what we are also kind of observing in our conversations. And nobody actually, right, responded with with it being decreased or somewhat decreased. So it's either, okay, we are on track, or either we are going up more. So that's powerful.
Yeah, it's definitely a sign of the times. And in fact, the client conversation that you had is music to my ears. And hint, hint, that was not a Patagonia that we were talking to. It was certainly somebody more mainstream. So this is absolutely interesting. I mean, it's also interesting to see that there's some small percentage of folks that are saying that there's no change. Hopefully that means that they were already investing heavily, but I think it is very telling to see that the last two categories basically had zero interest, which is great. Yeah. So Pratik, can you get us started in thinking about this trend, even the results that we have, as well as what we're seeing in the market?
Thanks, Rita. So here's an interesting trend that we see from Google, which kind of captures the interest of people over time for different themes. And if you would see, there are really sharp spikes here for some of the themes like metaverse and generative AI. So which are, we can call sort of themes of the year for the particular year. So while metaverse captured people's attention in 2021 and everybody was talking about it, and then moving into 2022, we see a lot of buzz around generative AI, and even right from enterprises to business stakeholders to service providers, everybody wants to know more. How can they leverage that in their business operations? But what's encouraging to see and kind of aligned to the survey results that we have here as well. So while there's slight dip in interest on sustainability when some of these themes gain traction, it has remained steady over the years. And in fact, if you would see, there's a slight rise in terms of interest over time. So what this sort of tells us that while some of these themes of the year come and go, it anyway divides the companies or businesses' attention in terms of competition for investment, as well as their priorities change when some of these things come up. But it's encouraging to see that sustainability does not really go down a downward spiral, and it continues to be a priority for organizations. And in fact, if we talk about enterprises focus on digital transformation, we see that sustainability goals are a core component of their digital transformation strategy as well. And here, if you would see enterprises across the different revenue base or revenue buckets, you would see that more than 3/4 of them feel that sustainability goals are an important component for their digital transformation journey. And even in fact, if we talk about the recent or the current buzzword around generative AI, we have seen enterprises also looking at the sustainability considerations when it comes to implementation of these technologies, whether it be the environmental impact from these large language models, or even the social considerations around how would it impact the talent market. So it's good to see that sustainability remains a priority. However, that being said, the magnitude of its magnitude varies across businesses and also across the different components within sustainability, if you look at. So while enterprises do agree that it is a priority, I think one of the areas that they struggle with in terms of the exact pathway or the roadmap when it comes to implementing some of their sustainability initiatives. So across industries, we see businesses focusing primarily on the environmental aspects of their sustainability initiatives, how they can revamp their business operations so that it's good for the environment while also helping them achieve their business objectives. Some of the leaders or some of the businesses do struggle with building a business case for some of these initiatives. While some of these initiatives require huge upfront costs, the business case in terms of the tangible and intangible benefits, that is an area where we see many of them struggling with. However, that being said, we have seen a lot of enterprises also tying the incentives of their C-suite executives to the sustainability goals that they have committed to. So definitely sustainability would remain a key focus area for enterprises in terms of investments and focus as they look to achieve some of their publicly announced goals. A lot of them look very aspirational, but it's encouraging to see that while there is some action happening, the overall intent is still there in terms of organizations moving towards more of a sustainable business operations.
And
Now,
Ritik?
looking at
so one thing that, for me became very interesting takeaway from this slide and the previous one is sustainability is going to be a seminal, consistent priority of organizations, which will have consistent increase in interest. So I know we have I think within the attendees I was seeing, right, we have people from data technology companies, cloud companies, even system integrators and consulting companies also attending. So the message to them then becomes is we will have these themes of cloud and blockchain and metaverse and AI and others which will keep coming and technology will keep evolving and there'll be a year for each of them. But sustainability is going to be that consistent theme which you need to invest in if you really want to make the buck out here. Right? So because that's where the priority is, that's where the investment is. And it's really encouraging to kind of see these statistics and the data that you're kind of showing us.
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
add to that comment, Ronak, that I think what's interesting is the interest is high, and even we've already gotten some questions on that from Brian, pointing out that interest is for sure high. I think the more interesting thing is, and probably the topic of our discussion, there's great variability when it comes to actual execution. And
Yeah.
with those targets in 2020, 2030, not too far away, that is sort of like the big elephant in the room.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely. Now, looking at the different aspects or attributes of key sustainability pillars, what we see is over the years, the governance and environment aspect has been a focus area for the management and businesses across the spectrum. We do see an increasing focus on the social dynamics as well, wherein we see businesses focusing on their employee well-being, also looking at their employee or talent portfolio and bringing in more diversity and inclusion in terms of their overall talent management strategy. While CSR is something that we see being mandated across many countries, we see businesses moving beyond CSR and looking to drive meaningful impact across the communities that they operate in. Reporting is something that we see businesses have been focusing on. A large part of it has been the push that regulatory bodies have given across the globe, especially in US and Europe. We see reporting being increasingly a focus area. And when it comes to strategic integration, that is an area where we see businesses still trying to figure their way out in terms of how do you incorporate sustainability principles as part of your overall organization's strategy. Now, Rita, while these are some of the attributes that we see, can you talk a little bit about how well these are understood by businesses across the globe, and also highlighting some of the ambiguous areas that we see?
Yeah, I think moving forward, I think this slide really gets into a little more color on these various pillars that you discussed. What I think is interesting is to think about the fact that there are all of these different dimensions that we've divided up into corporate citizenship and people-related aspects. And I'm sure none of these points are new to anyone that's on this call, as Brian pointed out, people that are interested in sustainability. What I think is most interesting, though, about thinking about each of these aspects is the level of challenge across the aspects, as well as how many regulations or norms or standard practices are in place. And we do see a lot more under corporate citizenship. Certainly reporting, yes, there's change and there's evolution that's happening around that, but there are norms around it, as well as carbon footprinting and natural resource management. Whereas we see many fewer standards when it comes to many of the human dimensions. When we think about inclusion, what's actually meant by that? We see some public policies around how that's getting defined, but that is still an area that keeps evolving. Same with DEIB and employee health and wellness. And I think that's a really interesting space, along with what's happening with emerging technologies like AI and Gen AI. And especially as we think about making sure that those are systems that are a limit, that we take out bias from systems that have automated what we do as a society. And I think that this distinction between the two is what we think is really interesting at Everest Group. We do have another quick poll that's going to keep in mind these different variabilities. So let's look forward to that. In the interim, Ronak, maybe you can talk about these levels of maturity and how we see businesses doing this.
Yeah, and I think Rita and Pratik, I think what you mentioned kind of gets me thinking about this maturity model and curve that we had built a few years back. And I think how relevant it is in today's days and age, right? Because we're talking about so many different aspects of sustainability across the people, planet, profit, governance aspects of it. And we look at what enterprise investments and actions are, and we start mapping to that. There comes out these stark maturity differences in organizations' behavior as they kind of move from one level to the other. And our team did a sustainability technology enablement services. I know that's a mouthful, but assessment, right? So they assessed more than 20 odd system integrators and consulting firms on their capabilities to manage sustainability initiatives and run sustainability initiatives for their clients. And we did something very similar on net zero this year. And we had like an amazing participation, more than 30 odd providers. One thing that became consistent across both these assessments is if you look at the case studies and the body of work that is getting done and being talked about, bulk of it, like almost 70% of this is around reporting, which is help me understand what's the current footprint that I have across planet dimensions like greenhouse emissions, carbon reporting, people dimensions, and then being able to kind of be able to report it. And that's the current maturity. That's where most investments are happening, which is good, right? Which is a step in the right direction. So if you look at the bulk of the industry, it's still having challenges around data. We don't have the right data to be able to report. We don't have the right data standards. We don't have the right reporting standards. We don't have the right calculations. So we are still in the phase where reporting and compliance is one of the bigger challenges that the industry is facing and they're trying to solve. And again, I kind of appreciate all the effort that is going into this in terms of how we are driving that. Then there's another 20% of work being done to mitigate the risk of climate change on your businesses. So I'm in the insurance business. I need to understand how climate is going to impact my claims and underwriting efforts and how do I change my business. The same is happening on supply chain, manufacturing, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So this impact of sustainability imperatives on businesses is the other thing we are doing from a risk mitigation perspective, which is I have materials that I'm using for my value chain, and I need to ensure that I don't get hit in terms of the material availability because of climate change and other initiatives. So those are the things where we are seeing the bulk of the investment happening. What we now believe the next level of maturity is going to be is on the level 3 and level 4. And this is where I think most of our conversation today is going to be, which is a forward-looking view, and we're going to talk about OKRs. I know a lot of you guys are waiting for that. So definitely is going to come up very soon. But I wanted to, I think Rita, Pratik, and we didn't want to jump to that because we wanted to set the context up, right? As we're talking about OKRs in the context of sustainability, this is the reason why. We want sustainability to be a way of doing businesses. And that's how we think about it. And that's where lead steers in the industry are already talking about it, and some are already actioning on it. So you are building a strategic business unit, you're building a center of excellence, you're driving training, you're driving change in the organization to build sustainable products and services, and not just talking about the impact from a sustainability perspective on your operations, right? So it's not just about the impact that I'm creating or the harm I'm creating because of my operations, but it's about what value I can add from a sustainability perspective in the operations that I do, right? So from a harm creation to a value creation equation, right? So we talk about harm mitigation to value creation mindset, and I think that is interesting out here. And the same then applies to, this next generation of, this ideal state of purpose-driven organization. We want to have every action that an individual takes in an organization to be driven by these principles. And I think that requires a very different type of training, change management, culture change, and people, process, data, technology changes to be able to happen to do that. And that's where OKRs is where we thought, if you want to drive these massive change in the organization, you need the right tool. You need the ability to kind of, define these objectives, define the results and metrics you want to talk about, and then connect them together as part of your change management program. And that's the reason why all of us are here today, and all of us are so passionate and excited about what we're going to talk about here today. And Rita, what definitely we want to do is get, the audience's views also on this as we kind of go along. So why don't we start the poll on this one?
Yeah, exactly. I think in those 4 levels, we've even got these 4 bullet points on where do you see your organization currently committed from a sustainability perspective. And we do know that the ultimate goal is to be purpose driven, but it's a journey. And we do need to make sure that regulations are taken care of, and risks are mitigated. So it'll be interesting to see, especially in this audience where we already know all their companies are highly invested in sustainability. So it'll be interesting to see where we come out. And I think we're seeing some good poll results so far. I like that everyone's quick to the draw. They want to get to the substance of the OKRs, Ronak.
No, and again, it's good, right? The results are coming in, and as I see the inputs to the poll, right? One thing that is becoming consistent is there is almost 1/5 of the audience who sees their organizations are only focused on regulatory requirements and compliance. I thought that number would have been higher, but again, it's good to kind of see that that's the primary focus, and people are reporting that. And the other bucket, which was risk mitigation, is the smallest bucket of all, which also means that the intent of climate change impacting on the business operations is something that is still yet to kind of percolate across organizations, is how I reflect on the results. The big one, which is a surprise for me, is 50% of the audience have mentioned that they have a centralized sustainability program with focus on incorporating sustainable practices. So that's powerful, right? That's really good. And then 17% talk about sustainability being core to organization strategy. So this is good, right? Because if people are already moving on this direction, and these are massive changes you need to do, so then you are at the right webinar to talk about OKRs today. So that's amazing to kind of see this distribution that is coming out here.
Yeah, I think especially because the tool itself is going beyond the reporting and risk mitigation and more towards thinking about how it's getting incorporated across an organization, be it centralized or decentralized. So yeah, I think this is a perfect setup for getting into the OKRs.
Yeah. And I think two things we definitely want to do today is, one, we want to talk about what are OKRs and what do they have to do with sustainability so that we can start everybody at the same level. And then we want to share a few examples on how we think we can embed sustainability more deeply in our organization to drive this change. I think those are the two big, objectives we want to kind of drive the discussion today. So I wanted to talk about first, what are OKRs? And OKRs are a powerful, they're a powerful goal setting framework. They got popularized thanks to a lot of technology companies who realized the traditional way of doing measurements and change management were always backward looking. They were trying to find the cause and then trying to change it. when very few had a very forward-looking view of driving this change. And that's where OKRs came to be. And a framework that is not just top-down driven, but also allows individuals and teams to align to the organizational goals is where OKR fits in, right? So that's my selling pitch on why OKRs is something that we are hearing. What's interesting for OKRs overall is it's a set of clear goals, right, at the broad list level, right? So it's a set of clear goals that are outlining where we want the organization to be. What do we want to achieve? So it should be at a level which is allowing us to provide that purpose of who we are as an organization and what we want to drive. And when I say organization, this could be the finance organization, the HR organization, the IT, the supply chain, or the entire firm as an organization is how I'm thinking about it. Is what's the purpose of who we are? Why are we here together as a group of people? What are we trying to do? And this allows the team to be inspired. It allows the team to give direction and drive change. So these are objectives, but objectives alone are not effective, right? Because they can sound really good, but what do we need to achieve, right? So how do I make it actionable? And that's where the key results come in, right? So they are specific time-bound milestones or events that we are measuring. They are a great indicator of progress that we are making. They need to be tangible measures of success. And the combinations of objectives and key results is what makes OKRs come to life. And in my experience, I've seen OKRs to not just be powerful goal setting frameworks, they are a great way to tell stories. They are a great way to tell and inspire people about who we are, what we are trying to do, and what we are trying to drive, and channelize behaviors that drive an alignment. And I think that's really powerful as we think about OKRs. And as we think about OKRs, one question that I get is, okay, that sounds good. Why should we use it? And I think there are a few benefits of OKRs that we've observed that we definitely wanted to kind of talk about. One is alignment, as I talked about it. A lot of organizations have what they call as a watermelon effect. And this is a very common term in the technology services industry, where we talk about all our metrics and KPIs are green, but everything else under the watermelon is red. We are facing challenges in terms of customer experience, employee experience, things getting delayed. So I'm measuring things, but I'm not getting the results. And this watermelon effect is what we are trying to address with OKRs. So we want to have that alignment. We are all aligned towards a common goal to avoid that watermelon effect, so that it's not like we're measuring a set of things which we don't get results on. The second is transparency and accountability. And I think this is very important as an organization, but even more important in the sustainability parlance, because we keep talking about the accountability of each individual, teams, organization to drive this. This is not, sustainability is not something which is just the responsibilities of governments and regulatory bodies. It's the responsibility of each one of us. And how do we get the transparency and accountability? The same way OKRs allow you to do this across your business units, across the activities that you do. It's also about speed, as I think about it, because clarity allows you to act faster. I think the lack of clarity is where we start facing challenges in the teams taking actions and driving change. And a framework that allows you to drive change and gives you transparency, clarity, alignment, and accountability creates speed. And I know for a fact, right, nobody on the audience today would say we don't care about speed and agility. Everybody does. I think that's where it is important. And last but not the least is it's a great storytelling tool. It's a great motivation tool. We've seen people use it in organizations to drive change. And as I say, these are massive change which you're trying to drive alignment of thousands of people towards a common goal, common objective, and results you want to drive. That's where this becomes very important. Now, I spoke about the watermelon effect and KPIs and metrics being used. And one thing that I do get a question is, we already use KPIs and metrics to measure ourselves. Why do you want us to do OKRs? And I've seen several of our clients use OKRs and KPIs together. So there is a definite need for the two, but we do believe there are significant distinction between the two approaches. And I thought, Prateek, why don't you talk a little bit about, how you see these approaches playing out in your research and your conversations with clients?
Thanks, Ronak. So as you said, while OKRs and KPIs are both performance management tools, I think what sets them apart is the way that you achieve your goals through these, right? While OKRs are more of a goal setting framework, KPIs are a lot static and they help you measure or track your performance against some of the predefined goals. Right. Through OKRs, you can have, through OKRs, you can have actionable goals with measurable components. While if you look at KPIs, those are just numbers that can help you track your business goals. OKRs are based on your company's missions and aspirations, while when we talk about KPIs, those are largely based on your current projects or some of the past results that you have seen across different dimensions. So in terms of their applicability also, if you talk about KPIs are generally used for measuring standard processes or business operations. However, when we talk about OKRs, they can help you to push more for a performance-oriented culture, which is, I think, critical when we talk about some of the sustainability initiatives that organizations undertake. And also in terms of their nature in itself, I think when you embark on your sustainability journey, based on your experiences, you need to evolve your goals as well, which is something that you may not really be able to do through KPIs. Either you would have to relook at them and define the different target levels or reset them. However, through an OKR approach, you can be a lot more flexible and you can align your goals and then tweak your results that you want to measure against those through their OKR framework.
Yeah. And
yeah.
And I think the key thing out here, I think, Prateek, what you mentioned, and I want to re-emphasize here for everyone today with us and those who are going to watch the recording later, is the difference between the two, right? The adaptability and agility of OKRs versus KPIs being very static in terms of the measures, I think are very critical to kind of look at how they play very differently in our mindset and the way we work. And I know, Rita, we're going to tie sustainability to this, so we're coming to that. But I thought before we do that, why don't you, take us through a poll, right, that we designed out here?
I love, we just keep hinting at everything that we're doing along the way. So, okay, our third and last poll for the day. Does your organization use OKRs already? Are you using them for goal setting and measuring outcomes? So this is not, are you using it for sustainability specifically? But great if you are, but this is where we want to get a sense of where everyone is on the call with regard to using OKRs. And I think this is another question. I like that this audience is so quick to the but I think we're starting to see a little bit of what we predicted, and it makes sense. If you signed up for this, you want to know more and use them more. So we'll keep the poll open for another 5 seconds and then share the results, which I think were, pretty close to what we were expecting. All right. Yeah. So majority of people are not using them or just getting started. So great. Welcome to the party. Yeah, I mean, I do kind of wonder if this is specific to sustainability or generally, but I think this is a good starting point for us to talk about the OKRs.
Yeah, no, because if I look at 74% are not using OKRs or just getting started with OKRs, I think that's the kind of mix we are getting. So I think we are in the right place, right? Again, we're talking about this, we're just getting started. So this aligns with how we were seeing.
Yeah, maybe the people who answer that they're already infused are going to be our next guests for the version 2 of this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Ronak, get us into the real depth of the information.
This is my time to roll up the sleeves and talk about this, right? This gets me excited. So as I think about OKRs and sustainability, I think there are two ways you can use this. One, as an organization, you're defining your OKRs for your entire organization, for your different business units and the teams within these business units. As you're designing those OKRs, make sure you have sustainability in the room, right? So the key thing is embed sustainability as one of your key outcomes when you're designing OKRs for your business unit. And we're going to talk with a live example in the next few slides. But I definitely believe this is going to be step one, which is let's look at it differently and kind of embed sustainability imperatives as part of the broader organizational goals. You are designing a customer experience journey and you want to build the next best customer experience and you want to design your OKRs for that. Think about how accessibility plays a role from a sustainability perspective, right? As you are thinking about redesigning supply chain to make it more efficient, cost effective, and improve your time to market, also think about what's the environmental impact of it, because that is also going to impact your costs and your brand image as you think about it. So the first piece of embedding sustainability in your OKRs, I think we all get it. The second piece of it, we have sustainability leaders in our organizations, chief sustainability leaders, chief diversity, equity, inclusion leaders, and we have folks who are risk and compliance as well as sustainability leaders, and also finance leaders and sustainability leaders all into one. So we've seen several personas of those. As they are designing goals for their organization, I think it's important to use OKRs as a goal setting tool. So we believe you will be able to use OKRs in these two different ways. These two will come closer and closer together as we put sustainability at the core of the organization. Till we don't do that, I think both of these are going to be important imperatives as we think about sustainability as a whole and OKRs and the combination of it. And Rita, I think we do have a great call to action for all our audience today. So why don't you talk about that and then we'll jump into the next set of discussions here.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we are really interested in having these conversations. So we have this complimentary offer for those that are participating in this webinar. I think we've included in chat what a link to this complimentary access. We'd love to have these conversations. I think when we learn about great practices and are able to embed that in our research, I think that helps sort of this broader movement for change and getting to these sustainability goals. So do take advantage of this opportunity to have these conversations and talk about best practices and talk about your OKRs. We look forward to them.
Awesome. No, again, I would love to have these conversations and how people are thinking about it. So this is going to be a good opportunity to continue this conversation that we are having on the webinar. So I thought let's start with it, right? So as I said, right, I want to give you a real example. So I thought let's do this, right? So this is an interesting one. We were working with a client. They were looking at several problem statements that they were addressing, and these were around customer experience, driving revenue growth, and several other themes. But as we kind of did the design thinking workshop and several other steps along the way, the key thing that came out was that the objective as an organization they wanted to do for the business unit that we're talking about is to increase user adoption and engagement. And they had then defined a set of key results that they wanted to govern themselves by with a very measurable impact for driving the changes in the. And what's interesting is as soon as they were able to kind of do that, they were able to design what these OKRs are in turn for their CFO audience, for their CIO audience, for their product audience, for their marketing audience, for their people leadership. They were able to then tie the entire organization towards it. And I think that's very important. And one of the questions we had received during registration was, what's the diffusion of OKRs in the organization? And we would say, if you do OKRs right, you don't have a lot of bystanders, you have lower diffusion. And one of the reasons for that is it's a change management alignment motivation driving tool. And if you use it correctly, you actually have very low diffusion as you kind of drive this because you are translating this to one level below as you think about it. So as we then talked about the CFO mandate, they talked about revenue growth and monetization of this product that they were launching. At the same time, the CIO was talking about that if they want to really do that, one of the big things they need to change is going to be around the payment security and trust of users, because they were not going to get user trust if they don't drive this change. And then they were able to talk about what are the changes that they want to drive in terms of the results they want to achieve out here. And this is interesting, right? Because one thing that we realized is as we did the entire exercise, the first thing we say is there's no sustainability embedded as part of this, right? And that for me was very surprising, right? Because as we think about it, all it is about is great product, great experience, driving growth, which is all good, right? There's nothing taking away from it, but the sustainability mandate was missing, right? And as we looked at the one level below, which was CIO minus one, and I'm an IT person, so I'm going to talk more technology now. So we talked about applications, we talked about automation, we talked about governance, we talked about infrastructure, and everything as we kind of did the bottom up view and the top down view. One of the things that came out was yes, we are able to translate this organization wide goal to team level goal. And we were able to then drive and define these key results that were all coming together to kind of drive the top behavior that we wanted to do. So to my earlier point, yes, we were able to drive alignment, have higher transparency and accountability, get speed out here because now everybody knows what they need to do, and they're able to kind of drive motivation of the people. All objectives met out here from a sustainability perspective, from an OKRs perspective, where the missing element was sustainability. And I think that is what we wanted to talk about today is how do you think about embedding sustainability into this, right? And that's where I think it became interesting, right? Because we want to talk about accessibility. We want to talk about are we having inclusion, because we will be able to drive growth by catering to folks who are, not included financially. So if you look at UN development goals, one of them is financial inclusion, right? So it's already out there. Somebody's already defined this as a goal for the broader, world. So we didn't have it as part of our design principles. So how do we do that? So that became our key theme to embed this is let's talk about people who are excluded from the access to financial services and drive inclusion. Let's look at folks who are seniors and people with disabilities. Do we have the right product for them? And that's the market we are not going after. So it is helping us drive growth, but at the same time, it is helping us be a better business. It is helping us to drive that transition. And the same thing that we realized is this is applicable across IT, talent, HR, marketing, finance. And that's where we started designing this is, yes, there's an objective, right, within CIO is, okay, let's talk about if I want to cater to more seniors and people with disabilities or folks who don't have access to digital tools as well as financial services access, let's basically drive accessibility of our products and channels. And how can we do that? There are standards out in the market like WCAG3 and others, but how can we do this as an organization to kind of make this happen for us? So the key thing was, hey, let's embed sustainability as part of our OKRs, and you will see it just not makes you a better business. It's driving growth, it's driving experience, it's driving a different brand value for us. Why wouldn't you do this? So let's not just use OKR for our business objectives, but infuse sustainability as part of it. And definitely wanted to talk about this. I know this is something when we talk to our clients about it, it seems very natural. And this, the first thing that they say is, yes, this should have been the first thing we should have thought about it. And this is now becoming something we want to not just have as an afterthought, but have as part of your ongoing thought process as you're designing your OKRs. And Pratik, I think why don't you talk about the other way around, right? Because we do have a lot of KPIs, metrics being used to kind of drive sustainability changes across organizations. So why don't you talk about that, and then how do we connect that to OKR?
Yeah, Ronak. So if we look at the current state in terms of using KPIs or metrics to track sustainability initiatives and tying back to the maturity framework that you had discussed earlier, right? So we see most of the organizations still in the first two buckets, more around reporting and risk mitigation in terms of the way that they go about measuring performance in terms of their sustainability initiatives. And in fact, if we talk about the regulatory bodies, and in fact, there are many independent organizations as well that are working towards defining measurable and comparable metrics, especially when it relates to climate disclosures. So there we see these being increasingly adopted by organizations. However, if we look at the framework that the UN Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosures, so if we see the core elements that are being defined there, metrics and targets are the base which forms the strategy of all these climate disclosures. And we do see businesses adopting them increasingly due to the various benefits that they are able to realize, which could include reduction in the cost of capital and boosting investments, with a lot of ESG focused funds also gaining traction in the financial industry. And also with regards to the allocation of your capital across the different areas of your businesses, which can help you in terms of measuring your impact across these climate disclosures. And this is why we see a lot of service providers even also increasingly providing services in this space and helping organizations in terms of how do you account for your climate impact. And it's increasingly gaining traction. However, back to the point, the focus still is largely on the metrics and the targets that you would have to measure some of these initiatives. Now, as part of our extensive research, we have actually identified quite an extensive list of metrics, whether it be finance-specific metrics, including the direct economic impact or value that you generate from your sustainability initiatives, the cost of your ESG investments, the cost that you incur to ensure your employee safety, health, and well-being. Also, emission. When we look at the climate-specific metrics, it ties back to the emissions that you have per $1 million of revenue. So this is more from a finance perspective, and increasingly we do see a lot of organizations trying to incorporate non-financial ESG metrics as well, which if we talk about some of the upcoming elements, it would include the number of upskilling that you do with regards to your workers, and also across the broader society, the percentage of independent directors that you have in your board, if we look at it from a governance dimension, and percentage of women also as part of the employee pool. That is a metric that we see increasingly being tracked by organizations. In fact, there are also women-focused hiring initiatives that we see a lot of global companies taking up. Now, while this is all metrics focused, Ronak, but if we were to apply these, the OKR framework in terms of, and tying back these metrics to that framework, how would an enterprise go about that?
Yeah, no, and again, it's so interesting, right? When you're talking about all these metrics, I was like, so much work is being done in terms of defining these metrics and KPIs and driving this change. But I think what's become the challenge is, I think at an organization level, we do have a 2030, 2040, 2050 goal. I think tying that objective to the goalpost and milestones that you need to be able to achieve that and define those key results is what was missing, right? Which is, if I need to reduce my GHG emissions by 20%, what are these set of activities I need to do as an organization across my different units, across supply chain, across people operations, across IT, across physical infrastructure, and several other themes, across my supplier management, to be able to drive this? And I think that delta is what we are trying to address out here, is right, because we talked about embedding sustainability in your OKRs for broader conversations. Let's use that tool in also your sustainability initiatives, because the key thing what we are facing a challenge is, and we do see a real struggle in the industry, is we all had 2030 goals, 2040 goals, and we were very confident at the start of this decade that a lot of these 2030 goals we're going to meet much sooner, like in 2025, 2026. And I think the early analysis that we are getting from a lot of our clients is that might not be true, right? We had to push back a lot of these teams, and we didn't realize it was going to be this hard in terms of the change that we need to drive, in terms of the alignment that we need to drive, in terms of the investment effort we need to do to get an organization aligned to this. And that's where we realized the missing component was we had the objective and we had a set of metrics, but we didn't have a set of key results. And that's what we're trying to change out here is how do we tie objectives and key results together to ensure we have these milestones and lampposts along the way for our 2030, 40, 50 journey, and also beyond that. And that's true not just for the environment piece of it, but also the people piece of it, right? And I know, Rita, you will kill me if I don't talk about this. So definitely, right? Because again, I'm very surprised, right? Because the investment that we started to see at the start of this decade in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, we saw a lot of leaders being hired, new roles being created. And suddenly over the last 12 months or even more, we're starting to see momentum losing on that front. And it's really, disheartening to see that. And we realized, right, and I think the key issue out there is not just about these roles or these individuals who are brought into the roles were not driving change or didn't want to. It was about the objectives and key results not being defined, because you need to use these to drive change. And the key thing was the change management process without these OKRs was very hard. We are not saying cannot be done without OKRs. Absolutely, you can do it, but it gets very hard to drive the change. And when we are fighting for investments with metaverse and generative AI in the same year, it becomes even harder to do that. And that's what we wanted to start our discussion today with is, yes, sustainability is fighting with other themes, right, or other investment areas to, drive this change. But we need to realize this. We need to embed these sustainability goals as part of our OKRs, at the same time design OKRs for our sustainability goals. Doing both of them will drive acceleration in what we want to achieve here, and at the same time allows us to kind of meet our purpose, drive change, motivate people, create a better brand as we do this. And I know we're going to come up at the end of the time out here, and we're so passionate that we can keep talking about this for another hour or so. But Rita and Pratik, I know we work with a lot of our sourcing, vendor management, procurement leaders, and I know some of them are also on the call. And we did want to make a appeal to them before we kind of close for today. So why don't you talk about that? Because this is going to be important for us to do before we kind of close here.
Yeah,
Rita,
so I can
go ahead, Pratik.
Yeah. So increasingly, we see that a lot of enterprises have been asking service providers questions with regards to sustainability. So what we have seen or what we have heard from the service provider side is they are largely reactive in these components. So when some of these questions come up, they go back to their respective teams, and then they sort of bring together some reports and so answer those questions as part of the RFI documents that we see, right? However, there's not really a structured approach when it comes to both from the enterprise side in terms of how do you incorporate sustainability parameters when you're reaching out to providers for your outsourcing engagements. And on the provider side, we do not really see a structured approach in terms of how do you sort of showcase your capabilities or what you're doing on the sustainability front to your potential clients and make a case for your business, right? So while we see more from an opportunistic perspective, it's not really a key decision-making criteria that we see in terms of the enterprise decisions or the factors that they consider while they're evaluating suppliers. But Rita, it would be interesting to hear your point of view also on this one and how you see this playing out.
Yes, I'm sorry, I got distracted by some of the questions that are getting asked. What were you asking me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just wanted to sort of get your perspective in terms of how you see the ESG or the sustainability components being integrated into the RFPs and what you expect the future to be like, especially along these dimensions. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I think some months ago, we put out some interesting content about specifically what are all the sustainability metrics that we're starting to see coming out in RFIs. In some senses, also seeding the conversation around things that we think need to be asked. But I think it is becoming much more of the norm, as well as new metrics getting added, which I do think it gets to the question that we've been asked by Venkat, asking how do you measure DEIB and its associated key results? And I think, you know, there's continued evolution of each of these things. Some of it is how is it that you're tracking the information, and some of it is self-disclosure, especially around the DEIB conversation. But all of those then translate into the bigger, broader business case and benefits that you have, and where you start to see the value creation from that change. So I think it's that whole pipeline.
Awesome. Yeah. And I know, Rita, kind of talking about questions which got you distracted. I think one that was an interesting one, and I think you were trying to answer that, was around key results for DEIB. And I think that's a fantastic question, right? Because as we think about key results for DEIB, the objectives that folks are defining, right? Again, as they think about this, is we want to have diversity. So the first thing is then becomes, what are the results you want to take forward in diversity, and at what levels of organization? Right. So I think setting up key results for that becomes important, which is how do we have diversity in terms of leadership positions, our hiring pool, right? How are we thinking about going across to, you know, hiring locations or sources and pools that we were not tapping into earlier? It's not just helping us drive diversity, but it's also helping us drive, you know, access to new talent pools that we were not having. And in a talent supply crunch environment, it absolutely helps. So defining those key results help, and then designing it not just at a workforce strategy level, but embedding this across business units and telling them that this is a great opportunity for you to use alternate talent pools, drive this change. And that's what we want to do. And I know I just talked about diversity. I think we can talk the same thing about equity, inclusion, belonging, as we think about key results that you want to have for those objectives as you do that. So I definitely wanted to take that question before we close. But Rita, any closing remarks, comments from your end before we close?
No, I think this is a great conversation, and we'd love to hear from folks to understand what is it that they're struggling with, and what are some of the successes that you're having also using this really powerful tool. We are thinking about and talking a lot about sustainability across FRIS Group, everything from talent to carbon footprints, and we want to be your thought partner on thinking about these things, and this powerful tool is an important part of the change management and change process.
Perfect. So thank you, Rita. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I really enjoyed the discussion, Pratik and Rita. It was amazing to talk to both of you on this one.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.